for us to review the week that has been, and weekend review starting off. Just a quick reintroduction of the guests. We are joined by Javas Bigambo, Ruth Mbogo, Mark Bichachi, and Joy Brenda Mdivo as we look at what has been happening. Of course, story number one this week has been the impeachment of the governor for Kiambu County, Ferdinand Waititu, and that has got many angles that one could look at it. Of course, his political career has been very, very dramatic all along. So his impeachment is something that some would say are not surprised. But let me start with you, Javas, in terms of your analysis of Waititu's impeachment. And there are those who feel that this is purely a war against graft, and it is a plus for devolution, because it means that senators finally are starting with MCAs, because that's where it started, are stepping up to their call to ensure that county governments are run the way that they should be. But there are those, again, who are looking at it from a political angle. I think one of the headlines yesterday was the DP's ally impeached. You know, your thoughts on which side do you look at it from?
I would start by saying that accountability is to governance what grammar is to language, because it constructs speech into the appropriate syntax. Here, what we are witnessing is a situation where we are seeing that the wheels of matters, governance, accountability actually are in action. Secondly, we're just about 7 years old into devolution, and the jurisprudence of on devolution is now being strongly built. Looking back by way of reflection in the Wambora cases and the determination, etc., when you look at the Makueni dissolution case under Article 192 of the Constitution, and now this is going to provide sufficient fodder in matters jurisprudence and building all that up. Nonetheless, if we were to put on very sharp lenses and look at what the populace of Kiambu have voiced and the County Assembly of Kiambu and the action they took, then later on, the kind of guillotine that Waititu faced on the floor of the Senate, it demonstrates, one, an apt consciousness on matters governance by the County Assembly of Kiambu and rising up to its accountability role and the checks and balances that are due to it by way of law. Secondly, when you look at the matter and how it was held, or rather processed, even in court, rather in the Senate, and now as it is moving to the court, it tells you that, one, we are coming alive to the reality that when somebody is holding public office, they are not a god unto themselves. That people can rise and voice and demand services from them by way of the strength of the laws that are in place. The supremacy of the Constitution, the statutory provisions, etc. And here we need to realize that there are legal lenses to look at this matter, then the political lenses. But the reality is this, that Waititu is being held to account. One, by virtue of the trust granted to him by the electorate when they voted him in as governor. But two, we also see the place of institutional frameworks playing their role in a setup of governance or a government system where, one, there are duty bearers, and then there are those who demand services from those duty bearers. And each one seems to be hawk-eyed this moment.
In this moment, Joy Brenda, maybe the progress that we have made, particularly in the war against graft, one thing we cannot ignore is the steps that we have seen progressively. When we look at the Wambora case, and even moving forward, the ruling by Justice Mombi Ngugi, adding to this, now we have a governor who has been impeached, and of course we'll wait and see whether he's going to appeal and what that is going to be. But the progress that we're making towards fighting graft and ensuring that we hold to account some of the leaders that we have.
Let me build on the point that Javas made, even as I'm answering your question, about the developing jurisprudence around dealing with impropriety with governors. Remember there was a push some time back by governors saying that they wanted protection from criminal prosecution while they were in office, just like you give the president. And the rationale for that was this, that you're not able to be removed from office while you're sitting. And now we see why they really wanted that. The problem we have had in Kenya was this misconstruct that under the new constitution, we could still get away with rape, murder, and manslaughter as long as you are powerful enough. And what is happening now, it's being debunked. Whether this was political or whether this was politically instigated, right now is not of consequence. What is of consequence is that after the process, do we still find you culpable? You've gone to the Senate, we still find you culpable. You go to court, if you're still found culpable, it doesn't matter how it started. What matters is we have followed due process and we still found that you're unfit to be governor, and people have had a chance to remove you as governor. As we're developing jurisprudence, I hope now Parliament will rise to the twin challenge to now change the laws to build the blocks to ensure that in future we have sufficient legal provisions to deal with it. That it's not confusion, chaos and mayhem. We don't even know which way is up. When we think we're turning left to realize, no, actually, there's a diversion to the right. That is what needs to happen with Parliament. But over and above that, I want also to see a buttressing of the roles of the MCAs. Because now the MCAs have realized, by the way, guess what? We are the ones who are holding the keys to this. And if we do not have a way to also hold our MCAs to some checks and balances, impeachment should not be easy. Because now you can imagine all those governors who've got a thing or two, their MCAs have already written them texts. Do this or else, because they know, this guy Kumbe,
it's doable.
We can take him down. We need to come to a place where our MCAs also understand that this awareness is not something that is there for their benefit, but is there for the benefit of the people who've elected them. So in this entire morass, the only thing that I'm hoping we as Kenyans will also not forget is that it starts from who you elect as MCA. So this fixation with who will be president, we need to quickly disabuse ourselves of it, because if you don't pay attention as to who you're sending to become an MCA, the parties who you're nominating to be Mafirifiri commercial, if we don't start from there, then we cannot expect quality debate or quality interrogation that will be able to hold governors to account.
All right, Mark, coming to you. Of course, there's the politics of this, and even on the Standard, some of it is captured. You have mystery of 4 senators who vanished from the House before the vote. And what this story says is that there was a number, these 4 senators were present when all this was starting. And I think when they realized which direction it's going to go, they left, and this was so that the 24, I think,
24, yes.
that is required would not be there. So of course there's a politics that is playing in the background, and even Waititu himself, when he was given a chance to give his comments and final remarks, he said that, as politicians, you cannot judge me based on where I am today. Tomorrow I could join you, and that's the truth about Kenyan politics, really.
Well, that's the sadness about Kenyan politics. We want Waititu in the Senate.
Well, he said he knows he has a chance.
Can you imagine Waititu making an argument before the floor of the Senate?
He was very coherent.
But seriously.
He was very lucid.
He was coached, of course.
No, coached or not, at least he put 2 sentences together.
No, but
it's not the ridiculousness you usually see online.
But have you seen, do you remember his interview? Do you remember his live interview? The last one that he did. Yes. These are the mistakes we made with Sonko. We put Sonko in a suit. Same story. He gave a speech called as Kenyara and the country of Kenya.
The city of
Nairobi. And then suddenly now he's polished. Oh, come on. Let's be serious as a country. These are the jokes we tolerate for far too long.
One of the dailies actually said we vote for clowns.
Exactly. It's a complete joke. The moment Waititu kicked someone on national TV, was caught in Mombasa, trying to bribe voters. His name on his what do you call it, degree from India is different.
Clifford Ferdinand.
How many jokes? His Clifford Ferdinand, Babayao, what? So, come on. As in, that guy, if he came to our chama where we contribute 200 shillings a month, each of us, we would not make him chairman. But for some reason, he can be governor. You see, the thing is, and let's address the politics. And I'd like to address the politicians. Now we know who are the politicians who support corruption. Now we know, because there's a list. And we thank God for that list. We know that Moses Wetangula would rather defend Waititu than kick him out. We know. And that should be underscored, and the nation should know. Just the same way, what is his name? The former Vice President of the United States, Biden, has to face the American people because he voted for the Iraq war. And he has to pay for that in this election. So can we make sure, first and foremost, if it is political, let's go the whole hog. The 4 who withheld their votes, can we find out who they are, name them and shame them? The people who we know have stood to defend Waititu. Politicians have stood in this country to say Waititu doesn't have to balance his budget. His audit queries are explainable. These are politicians who've said this. So let me tell you, for us to sufficiently fight corruption, there must be a criminal punishment. There must be a process punishment, which is what the impeachment we've seen. But there's got to be a punishment at the ballot box. We must take the war to where it must be. Because the truth of the matter is this. Now we know that the senators who defend corrupt governors in court will defend them in Senate. That's a fact. I dare them to deny this as a fact. Secondly, we know that if we trust these same senators to write our laws, they will write in them loopholes to make sure they can defend their own corrupt. What do I mean to defend their own corrupt? Who was the first lawyer on social media to give us reasons why the impeachment of Waititu and the installation of Nyoro should not happen? If that is not a defender of corruption, if he is not outrightly saying, I am on the side of the corrupt and I want them to stand. And I know the next thing Kenyans will tweet me, oh my God, if only Waititu was supporting the BBI or the handshake. My friend, Sonko was in BBI, ndani, right? He was still arrested. Secondly, it's not Haji nor Kinoti who impeached Waititu. So let's not make this political. That's just the things that people like to say. You know, they like to say, oh my God, this is because he was in Tanga. My friend, did Tanga participate? Why is in Tanga part of that 500 million is being charged in court? You understand? So let's not make this political in that sense. But let's make it political in terms of the vote. Kenyans, I'm telling you, if those 11 senators who dared in the face of blatant evidence that can even be recorded by the most junior person in this country, if they could stand before this country and say that they support such kind of governance to continue in this country, then those 11 senators should be voted out.
Okay. Ruth, youth policy advisor. Question is, Mark says that there should be punishment at the ballot box.
Yes.
And come 2022, we certainly are going to go to the ballot box and hopefully vote the right leaders in. What lessons should we be picking from here, given that we are evidently, like Mark says, seeing some who are in support of, or let me say, who would work against the people of Kiambu? The MCAs spoke, the senators spoke, but as they were speaking, there are those senators who felt, no, we would still like to protect him for whatever reason.
Yeah. I think first lesson would be a quote from a gentleman called George Orwell, and he said that the people who vote in corrupt politicians, imposters, and thieves are not victims but accomplices. And this goes, the same goes for the leaders who protect and defend corrupt politicians and thieves and imposters, not being victims but accomplices in the first place. Now that would be my lesson number one. And why I say that is because, again, second lesson for me, just to jump into the second lesson, would be that you see politics is a double-edged sword. Why is it that politics is good? For instance, in Sonko's case, when he sounded or appeared as untouchable, when the discussion around Sonko was that, oh, Sonko brought in the highest, one of the highest votes to the Jubilee vote basket during the 2017 elections. Why is it that when we were having that discussion of Sonko being an asset in the Jubilee government, then politics was good for him? He appeared as if he was protected by virtue of him having brought in the majority of votes. And the same case for Waititu. But then now when suddenly the sledgehammer falls on them, then politics becomes bad. Politics is good for politicians when it is working against you, and suddenly bad when it works, when it works for you, but suddenly bad when it is working against you. And I think Kenyans should not fall, for these antics and these emotional appeals and the emotional appeals that, our people are being attacked or our people are being targeted. And this would bring me to the discussion. Remember when BBI was coming, there was a whole discussion of BBI being a tsunami. In my view, if this is the tsunami that BBI was bringing along with it, that there would be a war and fight against corruption that would actually bring together people who would ideally never be on the same side. Had there not been the handshake that then led to the BBI conversation, I promise you, you would not see Jubilee leaders voting against Waititu if this was truly, we were just in a normal state of politics and we had an opposition that was in place and a government that was in place. So if BBI can bring together persons who would ideally vote on different lines based on whatever political parties they belong to vote against corruption and, stand against corruption, then I'm all about that conversation. But then I would love to see that conversation. I'd love to see more victims being brought in. I'd love to see a diversity of victims, because I know of regions where Kenyans are just sitting and waiting and actually praying and saying that my own governor needs to go through the sledgehammer. So I think the process needs to continue. And if this can be sustained for the next 7 months, that we shall see more and more corrupt legislators coming to the sledgehammer and facing it, then this would be a good conversation to have. But then again, when it comes to the citizen, I mean, this again is a good conversation to have, just like Joy has mentioned, that what kind of MCAs are we going to vote in? I remember an incident of a friend of mine who was a CEC, rather still is a CEC at one of the counties in the Western region, who was facing an impeachment motion against her because she had introduced an accountability system that would prevent MCAs from that particular county from pilfering, money that was meant for activity money within her docket. And basically all this was a witch hunt, witch hunt in the sense that now you're clipping our wings, we can no longer steal from you, so this is our moment to stop you within your tracks. So I think also citizens, on the other hand, now that the senators and the county assemblies are exercising their rights and their duties, I mean their duties to hold their governors in check and to hold their leadership in check, what role are we as citizens playing? I have never seen any citizens moving to basically exercise their rights and recall leaders who are not functioning, and especially members of parliament. So citizens need to play their role so that when 2022 politics comes, the voters
punishment at the ballot.
When 2022 elections come, then the leaders who are presenting themselves for elections know that, look, you are either fit for the game or you're not, and you choose your battles wisely.
Just a quick one. There are two things that we've mentioned here that need to be underscored. Number one, the fact that usually, if you look at Wambora's case, that the guy was impeached so many times, but the elections came because the courts kept interfering with his impeachment. I think what should happen, and what I encourage the government to do and make sure, is once someone is impeached, can we have the deputy who has not been impeached working so that the guy who's been impeached can go to court and prove to us that he's worth coming back? That is a better conversation to have than the impeached guy keeping in office while he has been impeached. That is something that we need to correct, and that's why I personally congratulate the government printer for printing that thing as soon as it needs to be done, because that's what the people wanted. The people wanted as soon as possible. And I'm going to tell the courts, this idea of everything is a certified urgent, what is urgent about Waititu? Seriously, what is the emergency? Right. You understand? The truth of the matter is, let him go through the due process, let Nyoro continue as governor. Then if he has proof that he is such an excellent governor, bring him back.
Absolutely. But before Javas contributes, I'd like us to also, I don't like it, and it usually irks me a lot when we try to throw jibes at the judiciary, forgetting also the role that the judiciary has played in this process getting to where it is right now. Don't forget that had it not been for Justice Mumbi Ngugi's ruling that prevented governors from going back to office, we would not be where we are today. That was one fundamental ruling that had been missing in the past, that would make governors go back to office, tamper with evidence, intimidate everybody, use money and resources to be able to buy their way back to office. So please, as we are castigating the judiciary, can we also talk about the good that the judiciary has done and the role that it is playing in ensuring that these cases actually get to the point that they are now?
To mark my friend and relative, it is said by Thomas Paine that to secure our own freedom, we must actually defend the liberties even of those of our enemies. So the issue of the urgency of the matter of Waititu, it's a question with respect to rights, liberties, and fundamental freedoms as enshrined in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 4 of the Constitution. Now, back to the Waititu issue, I would say that with reflections on the allegory of the cave, it would be known and it's noted that those who've lived in the cave for ages and have not seen light would not appreciate the place of light and even tell or differentiate colors. When and if Kenyans come to appreciate that accountability and accountable leaders would lead to proper service delivery, they would not hesitate to call on leaders to be accountable and make sure that we have got frameworks and institutions that work for the greater good of service delivery. There is something to do with antiquated Athens about Dionysius the Areopagite, who was a merchant, and he once said that, and it was spoken of him, that to demonstrate that he was a celebrated merchant, he would walk with a brick in his pocket as evidence to everybody that he met. Waititu, when he was facing this guillotine in the Senate, if at all he is that true servant of the people, that impeccable leader that has held the executive office of the county government of Kiambu, he would have demonstrated in fact and with evidence that this is what I did, that these allegations are only witch hunt, that I am imperiled if at all they are sustained without witnesses being called to make sure that they punch holes, they deconstruct all those allegations. He failed successfully. Waititu did not even make effort to bring witnesses in his own defense. But we know very well that he has rushed to court, hasn't he? And under Article 23 of the Constitution, as we know, that through Article 22, High Court can grant reliefs. One of them being a declaration of rights. He has said that his rights have been violated. Two, an injunction, etc. We have seen that a debt has been given under that agency certificate that my brother Bichach is talking about, to have his matter now adjudicated by the High Court. But the issue of him trying to stop the swearing in of his deputy has come a cropper. Here we need to realize that it should not just be a question of trying to defend your seat. That even as you seek for the declaration of your rights, etc., and trying to see how you can prove your innocence before the trial of fact that the court is, it is proper that the people of Kiambu County must continue enjoying the services, must continue seeing how they saunter toward the reality of devolution as it has been domiciled in Article 174 and 175
Should
of
be
the
no
Constitution.
vacuum. All right.
None at all.
And that's why I'm
Mark,
underscoring.
let me hear from
yes.
Joy Brenda, so that we also don't keep her here just, as a very nice spectating. But Joy, also to bring in the question of ideology and, the fact that we need to be watching this as a country. One picture that caught my attention, not even away, but if we look at how Waititu's case went and some of the senators who were supporting Waititu, then we look at a funeral service that took place not too long ago, and we see the deputy president with just recently fired CS. Does that give us an indication that maybe there is actually a truth to the fact that there could be people that are supporting this, gang of people that seem to be in favor of people, regardless of the fact that the people of Kiambu had spoken?
I think in this matter, if we now look at it in terms of the politics, Ruto has played some pretty clever politics here. One thing he has done, he has chosen to stand with Waititu when Waititu was at his lowest. And when even the other politicians from around Kiambu are not standing with Waititu. So it's very curious that you're seeing people who are firmly in, I mean, people like Murkomen, and that was the criticism when we even saw them turning up in court, was if this comes to Senate, how will you engage? But I think the Ruto camp is playing some pretty clever politics. You may know that you're not going to succeed, but now you have the bragging rights to say, you know what, when your man was down, I stood with him. I am loyal. I do not forget my friends. I always stand by them. I always pay my debts, no matter what. Brotherhood forever. Because we would be fooled to imagine that Waititu has zero support on the ground. He managed to win an election by a very large percentage of the vote. He managed to win an election. There are people who must be watching this thinking, you know what, fine, so you've chased him home, but you know what, at least we know you stood with us to the end. And I think that's the political capital that William Ruto is trying to harvest. He may have known, by the way, we're not in it to win it, but he's looking beyond what is happening here now, which, in my opinion, is like excellent political strategy. At the end of the day, it doesn't help him with the narrative of corruption, because Waititu is being chased out of office because of corruption. So if you want to debunk the fact that you're the high priest of corruption, then how come you're the one rushing to the aid of the ones who are corruptible?
But
when just on that score, Robert Greene reminds us in the 48 Laws of Power that try as much as possible to avoid bad omen and bad company. Now, when we see also, looking at it from that twist, that, because these men now have got bad omen upon them.
True.
Whether it is former CS Kiambu, whether it's now Waititu.
And Sonko next in line.
Yes, there's bad omen hanging around them. It's like when you love the company of owls, you will not be celebrated as an angel among men.
But Javas, think about who's the omen. Is it Ruto who's the bad omen?
And that's the question. Because like the funeral service I mentioned, we see Ruto and Kiambu, exchanging pleasantries. And whereas it is a free country, you can relate with whoever you want. What does that say when this is somebody who was recently fired by the president?
But you see, here's the thing, and let's be
we
very
didn't finish
clear.
the omen. There was a story there. There was a story there.
The omen.
Bichati had owls. He was like, no.
No, actually, let me tell you, this is what it is, and I agree fully with Javas, right? You need to understand that you are who you associate with.
True.
Show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are.
Exactly.
So show me your friends and I'll show you your character. Now, if you find certain characters very comfortable around me, then you know I am very comfortable around them.
For a reason.
I'm comfortable with what they do.
Yes. So when Obado was released from remand, his first company speaks a lot. That's all number one. All number two, Ferdinand Waititu. When his battles began, Ruto was first to defend him. Right? If you remember, when he said his budget queries are understandable, they happen. The same can be said of Ruto and Aroranki Mwarer. When he said what money has been lost,
it's not
been lost. And now he's fraternizing with the selfie locust king, who, by the way, was not mourned by Kenyans when he was fired. Let's be clear.
It was adios. Good readers.
And the truth of the matter is, what Javas is saying is important. Because if William Ruto's strategy, now let me speak as a communication strategist, is to win the sympathy of the people, you cannot win the sympathy of the people by leaders who've been impeached and retrenched because of incompetence and suspected corruption.
Yep.
You're not going to win sympathy. And you can tweet me all you want and you say I'm harsh or whatever, but that's just the truth. The truth of the matter is Ruto is going to put this country into a corner, and I think it's a good corner. Where are we going to really, really fight corruption, or are we going to be friends with the corrupt?
And
that's where it's going to go.
Yep.
That's where it's going to go. And the good thing with President Kenyatta is he's shown it very clearly. You get a case in court, me and you, we are done. He switches off his phone.
Yep.
So as far as that is concerned, you can throw mud at him for as much as you want. But in this second term, he's going to come out looking clean because he disowned Thuge, he disowned Rotich, he disowned Sonko, he disowned so many of his people that were perceived to be in his place in Damu. And his deputy is doing the opposite. And let me tell you the truth, and I'll tell you as a communication strategist, soon you will see people begin to connect Ruto and the corrupt people, because unfortunately his right-hand man in Senate was voting for the corrupt, and in court is representing the corrupt.
All right, and that brings in now the next discussion. Tomorrow, all eyes are going to be in Kitui, and this is with the BBI rally. But as a result of last week's rally in Mombasa, there's a faction that came out and went to Naivasha, and as a result, they say that they're going to hold parallel rallies. And of course, well, we had Didmas Baraza here yesterday, and he corrected us and said they're not parallel rallies, they're complementary rallies.
Are they happening at the same time? No.
Not necessarily at the same time, but they decide,
the conversation.
Yes, to carry on the conversation. But the question, of course, was if the platform is open, like it was in Mombasa, and Murkomen had an opportunity to speak where maybe many would have thought you'd not be able to speak. If the platform is open and the end game is to ensure that it's for Wanjiku, it's for the Kenyan, why then have other rallies? Maybe let me start with you, Ruth, in terms of what we should expect of these BBI rallies, and question also being whether they really are addressing the nitty-gritties, the questions that Kenyans have, or is it just political rallies and a platform for people to campaign?
Well, the outcome of the Naivasha meetings or rallies, parallel rallies as you put it, complementary as they say they are, was just a difference in the figures of what had been proposed in the BBI report, that where BBI was proposing a certain percentage to be allocated to the judiciary, the outcome was from these meetings was a different figure. So, and for me, the conversation would be, is it an attempt to try and discredit the document, or is it a genuine process to find out what the people think? And are the people's interests at the heart of this? Because if you ask an ordinary citizen, they would not concern themselves with the numbers to be allocated to the judiciary. They would not concern themselves with percentages to be allocated to who. They would tell you that this is what we want and this is what is of concern to us. And in my view, I never saw that coming out. And then again, there's usually the communication beneath the communication itself. And the communication beneath the communication began way back, I think, after the president had a meeting in with Central Kenya leaders. And then, you know, there was a totally different photo opportunity moment with this crew of people who came together and said Sagana was good, the region is united. And we are seeing the same, you know, politics or politics playing again around the BBI conversation, because you saw all of them posting one singular message. I don't know whether they were saying Naivasha was good and the region is united or something to that effect, but yes, same kind of communication. So this to me would come out as a small faction of leaders coming out of the BBI conversation and posing to be holding parallel rallies and complementary rallies, when in the real sense what they are doing is, you know, coming together with a political formation that would eventually oppose the BBI. And I would not be surprised if in a month's time or 2 months' time, we would actually have an opposition coming out of this BBI. And I think, in my view, again, as Mark Bichachi has said, from a communications, I'm not a communications expert, but I'd love to say that the confusion that is evident in the Tanga team as regards the BBI conversation could work for them or against them. They need to decide whether they are actually part of this conversation or not. And if they are part of this conversation, then the best thing to do for me would be, I would not say follow the bandwagon and nobody can stop reggae, but I'd say go where people are going. Air out your views within these forums where people are, you know, are truly airing out their views. And then again, nobody even shows us, again, when it comes to these parallel meetings, nobody shows us whether the citizens are actually contributing to these outcomes that they're putting out there, claiming to be citizens' outcomes. Are we seeing citizens coming out in support and saying, yeah, we actually agree with these resolutions that have been put out and this is what we think? So there's a lot to interrogate there, but in my view, I think there is a strong opposition. I would not call it strong, but there is an opposition that is building up that will eventually show its claws in due time.
In due time.
Yeah,
Joy, do you
in a
feel
short
that
while.
These BBI rallies are really addressing the crux of the matter? We have the 9 points that the handshake and the task force that was formed that, you know, brought about the Building Bridges initiative. Do you feel that those 9 points are actually a point of focus, or have we completely diverged and gone into other things?
The BBI report, as it came out, made an attempt to address the 9 points that they had put out before. And when you read the document, you got the feel that they tried to put in something for everybody, to try and address as many concerns as possible. What we are seeing now is a mutation of what came out of Bomas, which is what I find a little bit concerning, because I have participated in various forums when you're talking about BBI, and I am very involved in religious circles, for example. And when you go to the churches and I tell them, okay, let's open the document, let's read it through, and you start and they sit very patiently as you start the document. Then you get to the place where they say Qadis wanted the Qadi courts want appellate jurisdiction, and the meeting ends there. The church leaders are all, oh, this is why we went against the Constitution 2010. If it's being snack, then we want it. And then I realized that people are approaching BBI like it is what we had prior 2010, the constitutional review. We're behaving as if we're preparing for a Bomas. We are preparing for a draft, a zero draft that will form a new constitution. That mind construct has been fed by what we are seeing also from our political class. When you start talking about we want regional governments, we want a president with 2 deputies, with 3 deputies, I don't know. We want a prime minister with also 3 deputies. So people are taking cue from the politicians and say, oh, so we are going to open this thing and everybody's going to have their wish. Guess what? I also have 3 wishes that I want done. And I think we are going to lose the plot if we follow that way, because the document will be torpedoed. What comes out of it is just going to be total utter chaos and mess. I think we need to hit Control, Alt, Delete, especially the politicians. I wish they would just take 2 steps back. Let the task force drive this process forward. Let us see Kenyans coming, presenting views, presenting memoranda. Let's break down that memoranda, then tell us what Kenyans have said. Because right now, there's too much lost in the din that we are not even distilling what Kenyans are really saying. And the misfortune with that is the time will come when now the question is proposed in June. This is what we are going with. And then the government will end up suffering this very embarrassing defeat, because Kenyans will be like, you know what, we tried to talk, you didn't let us have a say. Guess what, now that you want us to have a say, we will have a say.
All right, Mark, your expectation of what this rallies should be, because obviously we know, like you say, Joy, that it really should be about the things that Kenyans care about. But the truth of the matter is, we know our politicians are not going to go that way. They're going to take advantage. They're going to use that platform to push their own selfish agendas.
Paid for by the taxpayer.
Paid for by the taxpayer, exactly. Mark, what should we be looking out for in these rallies, and what should we expect out of them?
Let me give my people watching a brief strategy on how to deal with democracy. The elite will always have what they want. The trick is, while they're getting what they want, you get your pound of flesh. Let's be very clear. For the governors who are second-term governors, their interest in BBI is either to remove term limits or to create federal states, right? That's their agenda, okay? Now, let's remember that while they're discussing that, they're then in turn forced to consider, okay, wait a minute, what can I give Wanjiku and Bichachi and everybody else to support my agenda? That's a strategy we have to have. Let me tell you, because you do not lie to yourself that there is any senator who's going to go into BBI and not think, what can I get out of it? That's just human nature. It will happen, and it happens everywhere. But what we as Kenyans need to be very clear is what is our pound of flesh. And BBI gives us that opportunity. And that's why I praise the people of Coast, for example, who talked about, and they said, you know what, if you're not going to deal with the land issues, we don't want to hear from you. And that's how it should be. That, listen, if you see, let me tell you something. It's been bandied around, and it's said, oh my goodness, a prime minister position will cost us so much money. That's hogwash. The truth is, we've done the math. A prime minister position is going to cost us, if extra, about 15 million bob, right, to run the office. Because the office space exists, it's a matter of running staff, right? And you're not going to be paying the staff 100 million. Let's just be honest here, right? So it is not an expensive affair as such.
But is it what Kenyans want?
No, that's the question. But if they're going to get the prime minister position and I get my 7 years tax break when my business is struggling, why not?
So be it.
That's really the mathematics. That's the mathematics that you have to do. The last thing I'm going to say, 30 seconds, is these parallel rallies are not BBI parallel rallies. If you look at the rallies that Raila Odinga is leading in the political lens of 2022, then you are seeing his clout grow and you want to make your clout grow too. It has nothing to do with the people. Let's just be very honest.
All right. Javas, I'll need you to finish off with BBI. I'm told we're out of time, so...
I would say that lifetimes and observations have taught me that however poor you are, your teeth cannot grow thin. When we witness the proposal of parallel rallies with regard to BBI, it tells you that some people have decided to grow thin with matters of appreciating the reality of the times. That there is so much deprivation of coming to terms with the reality that if at all we want to shepherd our democracy to a particular direction, and the president, who derives his authority from the people who are sovereign, and we've seen parliamentarians, politicians, of course, awaiting that significant moment that will come when all these will be collected, and then titrated into now an issue that can be determined by the people by way of a vote or a plebiscite. Then we don't need to see people pulling in different directions. When you just take a toothpick or a scalpel and scratch at the semi-permeable membrane of the Naivasha meeting, for example, it will tell you that it is devoid of sincerity. And I would want to appeal to the conscience of the entire team that met in Naivasha. If at all the issue here is about BBI, if at all the issue here is about how to make amends to the Constitution, for example, and see how we make our democracy richer and better and expand our liberties and freedoms and make sure that with regard to service delivery, then the lives of the people will be ameliorated, then we do not need these parallel rallies. Let us put our minds together and say that the direction that His Excellency the President and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga have given with respect to us having a national conversation and in the end see what it will culminate into, then let us not have many rallies. Let's just have one rally. Let us have the BBI rallies as organized by the steering committee, and then let us go forward and make this country better.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll have to wrap it up right there. Thank you, Javas Bigambo, Ruth Mbogo, David...
Wow.
Ubatiso. Ubatiso.
Mark Bichachi. I don't know where David came from.
He misses you. He misses you.
Enjoy, Brenda. I know I won't get the end of that, but thank you very much for joining us this morning. And that's where we wrap up Week in Review, but do stay with us. Morning Express continues after the break.